Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Katerji show with me, your host, Katerji. Welcome to another edition of the show. Pleased to see you all. As usual in the chat, welcome new viewers as well. We've got a really interesting guest today. The last time we had a similar guest, I guess, we had Matthew Collins from Hope Not Hate on, who was a former far-right activist who then turned into an anti-fascist activist over the course of his life. And we have, when we did that episode, and do check it out, it's on YouTube and it's on Twitch in my previous episodes, I said I would like to bring on someone who is radicalized in a different direction, in a Islamist group. And one of the most interesting stories I've ever read about is my next guest, Aimen Dean, who traveled on a path from extremism as a former member of Al-Qaeda to a MI6 spy working for British intelligence. And he's the author of a book about that. So we're going to bring him on now to tell us more about himself and his life. So without further ado, welcome to the show, Aimen. Thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I never thought I would be on your show, but nonetheless, wonders never cease.
Well, listen, it's an absolute pleasure and honor to have you on the show. So look, again, at this point of the show, I say, but, tell us a little bit about yourself, but your story, is your story. So I guess, tell us about, your early life and the early choices and paths that you went down. And then we'll go from there, in a chronological order of your life, I guess.
Well, as I always, whenever I start talking to people, especially when I meet people at random in my daily life, I have a crazy daily life, by the way. I run few businesses, and I meet lots of people from either the business community, government communities, all over the place here, and they always ask the question, what happened to you? And I always say, look, no one, ever wakes up one day and say, oh, today I'm going to be a terrorist. It never happens. You just, you become the embodiment of this old adage. The path to hell is paved with good intentions. And I always tell people that that's what I see the majority of people I met in my life. Who were trying to do the right thing, but they were seduced, by multiple appealing factors that dragged them into, joining radical causes that, in the end, made them do the opposite of what they were intending to do. So, in my case, it all started in a small town in Saudi Arabia. At the time, it was a small town. Now it's a big city in Al-Khubar in Saudi Arabia. I was born to a Bahraini father, a Lebanese mother. Not many people know that, but and the fact that I was the youngest of 6 siblings, all of us were boys, and my family was Aramco family, so we're all oil. Sometimes, I always use to joke that if I ever bled, people will smell, in addition to the metallic smell of the blood, that there will be some, that smell of sulfur and oil and gas and all of that. All my uncles, all my 3 uncles and my father, all the 4 siblings, were Aramco from the beginning, from 1938. And if you grow up in the east of Saudi Arabia, especially in a place like Al-Khubar, Dammam, Al-Dhahran, where Aramco was, you grow up in a really one of the most special places in the entire Arabian Peninsula. Because I remember whenever I used to travel all across Saudi Arabia when I was young, into Riyadh or Medina or Mecca or Jeddah, I remember, especially the people of Riyadh used to hate us. They say, to us, in the 1980s, you are so lucky. Why? Because we grew up with more TV shows than they did. So they had 2 Saudi channels, channel 1 Arabic, channel 2 English. That's it. For us, we had multiple channels from Bahrain, from Qatar, from Kuwait, from Dubai, Abu Dhabi. So plus Aramco TV, which was catering for the American, British, and Australian expatriate communities who used to work in the oil sector. I grew up in a place where it was sectarian. I remember my school used to be 3/4 Sunni, 1/4 Shia, both faculty and student. And to grow up at that time was really interesting because it was the 1980s, the Iraq-Iran war. So Team Sunni, Saddam Hussein, so we were supporting Iraq. Team Shia, Khomeini, so they were supporting Khomeini. Every time we hear on the news some good news about the Iraqis capturing Al-Fao Peninsula or anything like that, like we used to taunt the other side, as if it was a football match. And it was all happening just 300 kilometers to the north of us. And also at the same time, the Afghan jihad was waging around us. People were going volunteering because it was a fight against the godless communists. And growing up in Saudi Arabia, that was regressing rather than progressing because of what happened, of course, in the glorious year, and I'm being sarcastic here, of 1979. I was born just at the end of 1978, so I did not catch up the beautiful side of Saudi Arabia when I was growing up. I caught up with the reactionary Saudi Arabia that reacted at that time to the 1979 siege of the Grand Mosque in Mecca and the subsequent reaction of the Saudi royal family to that when they doubled down on conservatism in order to placate the conservative class at the time. It was, of course, 1979 when the Soviets invaded Afghanistan, starting the jihad there. 1979 when Ayatollah Khomeini launched the Islamic Revolution in Iran, kickstarting the sectarianism that I was talking about. And of course, Saddam Hussein came to power in 1979, which then started also that dynamic between Iraq and Iran, which also had an impact on the sectarianism that we started to see. And I came originally from Bahrain, which is even more divided in terms of sectarianism. My mom was from Lebanon, and of course she was from the south of Lebanon, from Shib'a, which is on the border between Syria, Golan Heights, and Lebanon. And so, her town was invaded by the Israelis at that time. So you can imagine my life as a young child. I mean, here, it's like the news was the most fascinating thing for my mom to watch. And for me, it was enough to politicize any individual. And that's why our generation at the time was, in the 1980s, in that particular side of Saudi Arabia, was far more politicized than any of the rest of the country. Into that political soup mix came the August of 1990 and Saddam Hussein invading Kuwait. Suddenly, basically the one that we were cheering up for, now he is the villain. And our fellow Kuwaitis, we are the first major city that faced them as soon as they escaped. And so we started seeing the weirdest refugee crisis unfolding at the time. I still remember I was 11 and seeing multitude of Kuwaiti numbers, Kuwaiti cars with Kuwaiti number plates, coming, streaming in there. Cadillac and big GMC cars and BMWs and Mercedes-Benz, and it's a wealthy exodus. And I thought it could never happen. You hear about refugees and war traumas and everything somewhere else, but I never thought I will ever see it. And then 6 months later, I used to go out to the shop or to the mosque where having a gas mask ready, with me, because our town also play host to the largest airbase in the entire Middle East, King Abdulaziz Air Base, where more than 200 of the coalition aircrafts were stationed. So we were naturally the most bombed city by Saddam Hussein's Scud missiles from January 17 until February 24th. I still remember these days etched in my memory because 124 missiles were launched at us during that period, that 6 weeks. So, of course, our house, I remember we used to be only about 800 meters away from the fence of the base. So we used to hear the sound of the shock waves coming from the intercepted missiles just a kilometer or two above us. And we used to wonder if it is conventional warhead this time, or is it going to be something else, because we used to wear our gas mask every time we hear the sirens. And then for the 3 months after that war, we used to live under a dark cloud, literally, because Saddam Hussein blew up 700 of the oil fields to the north of us in Kuwait, and then it caused the day to be a night. It caused that entire sky of the eastern province of Saudi Arabia to be dark. And we used to, I remember I used to go out with my white thobe, and we used to have acid rain with oil. And so basically I used to come back with my thobe being gray, because the rain was laced with oil. It was dark clouds. So we used to have the day that looks like night for 3 months. And then 2 months after that, my mother died. And so for me, that was like the end of an era and then the beginning of another era. For me, that is when my journey, to become an imam. I wanted to become an imam and to become a theologian. That's when it all started. So I gave you more or less an understanding of, from, my early childhood all the way until I was 12, until my mother passed away. And that's, how it was full packed of events that was so, condensed my life into, it propelled me into understanding and accelerated my understanding of politics and geopolitics in a way that usually children somewhere else never experience. And I think once the death of my mother occurred, I think this is when I started viewing religion more than just things to learn and to memorize. And by then I memorized the Quran already, but suddenly that memorization of the lines started to take more real. It's basically it started to become more real. I started to view the verses with far more clarity, especially when I started to understand, how to deal with, first was with grief, but then after that to deal with the matters of, death and life. And then after that, you start to go into deeper theological questions. And as you start to go deeper and deeper, I, in search of answers, ended up reading not the ancient, not so cool books of interpretation of the Quran, from 700 or 800 years ago, but I started looking into something far more contemporary. And that's when I was told to read Sayyid Qutb and his book, Fi Dhilal al-Quran, which means In the Shades of the Quran, 4,000 pages. It took me 2 years to finish. And it was an interpretation of the Quran based on his understanding of it. And his understanding of it was, as you know, he wrote the book over 9 years when he was in prison. And goodness, you can tell, when you are reading him, that he was going through his own journey of pain, but also his own journey of resentment. At the beginning, you identify with him because you see him, using his beautiful poetic language to take the verses of the Quran, deconstruct them, and apply them on modern day. And because of the pain he was going through in prison, the pain of his grief, of loss of loved ones, and at the same time, his struggle to disentangle Islam from either capitalism or communism, from how he see Egypt being torn apart by the radical nationalism and socialism of Abdel Nasser and the Nasserite generals of the 1950s and 60s. You start to identify with him more and more, and you start to see that many of the political events that took place in my lifetime were happening because of what he called the lack of Muslim unity. And I started to believe in what he was talking about, the kingdom of God on earth, based on the understanding of the early generation that were around the Prophet Muhammad. And slowly, gradually, I just became more convinced of his vision that the older generations of Muslims never had to deal with a far more challenge than the current generation of Muslims. Therefore, we need a better understanding of how to propel the faith back into a stage of sovereignty, as he called it, the sovereignty of God on earth. And slowly, gradually, I just started to accept it. By the age of 16, I was ready. I just didn't know it yet. So when the opportunity presented itself, one day in September of 1994, I just took that opportunity. Within 10 minutes, I made up my mind, and I ended up joining a friend who was going to join the jihad in Bosnia, joining him in his journey rather than saying goodbye to him. I ended up asking him to take me with him, and that's how it all started.
Well, look, that's a really comprehensive view of your early life. So, look, I think my question is, I'd like to dig in more into that decision to go there, but also this journey from not just being a pious Muslim, a conservative Muslim, to Salafism, to Muslim Brotherhood style politics. Sayyid Qutb, for those who don't know, is the kind of, I guess you would say, the leading theorist for the Muslim Brotherhood, one of the most senior figures in the Muslim Brotherhood's history. Going from the Muslim Brotherhood, which again is a controversial group, and we could talk about them all night long, but I'm more interested in how, because Islamism is far more common than sort of Salafi jihadism. So can you talk to me about that journey from Islamism to Salafi jihadism, and about that journey from leaving Saudi Arabia and deciding to join your friend in combat, in a foreign land? Those are huge decisions that any young man could make, life-altering decisions, but they're decisions that commonly happen, particularly in the Middle East. Also, there's a lot of the understanding that we have today of radicalization. A lot of it is based now on people being radicalized online, finding this information online, rather than being radicalized in mosques or in religious schools. So this, you come from the world before that, and you also come from the home of many of these political movements. So your journey to this is going to be different to many of the contemporary understandings that we have based on ISIS and Al-Qaeda post-Iraq war. So you are really at the start of this, as Al-Qaeda goes from a small radical group to being the world's foremost Islamist terrorist organization, to falling back and being supplanted by its far more radical bastard child, I suppose you could call it. But again, we could talk about all of those different groups. But again, I'm more specifically interested in your journey from Islamism, which is a much more common thing in the Middle East, to Salafi jihadism, which is far more uncommon, but also, again, it's not a well-trodden journey, as it were. It's understandable how that link is made if you understand these things, but our audience won't. So again, imagine you're talking to people who have no comprehension of these kinds of, because that's mostly the audience. Whereas, I've spent more than a decade researching this stuff, so it makes a lot more sense to me. So I'm trying to pry the questions out of you in a way that we make it as basic as possible for people to follow along. So yeah, about that journey, how did you make that leap from one to the other?
For 2 years, I think, from 1992 all the way until 1994, I was, along with millions of others, subjected to the images of the brutality and the butchery that was coming out of Bosnia at that time. And for me, it was one of those shocking moments. I mean, you saw what happened in Afghanistan before, and we saw what happened the Algerian civil war at that time. But for me, I think Bosnia resonated because first it was unexpected. It happening in an unexpected place. And what made it even more shocking is the fact that the Bosnian Muslims at the time were not exactly like, like migrant community who just like, happened to be, of Turkic origin who just appeared, in the middle of Europe. No, they were actually genetically similar to their, Serb and Croat, fellow Serb and Croat. Like, and so they were just killed based on names. Basically, like, your name is your death sentence. If your name is Ahmed or Mehmed or Mirsad or Yasin or Abdin, it doesn't matter. Like, you could lose your life based on your name and identity, even though these people, like, they lived under communism for 70 years and almost, like, forgot most of what their religion was about. And for them, religion was something ceremonious rather than something that they were living on daily lives. They were drinking and smoking more than anyone else, as much as their fellow Serbs and Croats were doing so. They were completely balkanized. Yet that shocking reaction of the Bosnian Serbs towards the referendum in April of 1992 was, an ethnic cleansing on a, on a monumental scale that the United Nations called it like, ethnic cleansing and even genocide, and especially like, deploying rape as a weapon of ethnic cleansing and a weapon of war against the Bosnian Muslims at the time. So for me, the message that there were people going there to fight the jihad there, and I heard about them. I heard about people going there fighting from Saudi, from Egypt, from Turkey, from Kuwait, from Bahrain, from my, even one member of my, of the Bahraini royal family went there to fight and die in 1992. So it wasn't something foreign to me. But when I heard that one of my friends was going, and he was 3 years my senior, and in fact, this is one of the things I lament, I think, in my early childhood, is the fact that most of my friends were, like the youngest friend I had was 2 years my senior. Like, some of my friends were 5 and 6 years older than me at the time. So I felt that on the way to his house to tell him that, well, I wish you all the best. May God be with you, and wish him well on his journey. But in these 10 minutes walking to him, and I'm saying to myself, why am I, he is going to join the caravan. This is the mentality for us in the desert. Like, it's like there is a caravan that is going, and if you don't join it, then you are left behind. And if you are left behind, you'll always ask yourself for the rest of your life, what if? So when I went to see him, I felt like, I don't want to be a spectator on the sideways of history. I don't want to be just watching the caravan passing me by and wishing that I joined it. And so when I told him that I'm going with him, at the beginning he pleaded with me to tell me, like, that you just turned 16, for God's sake. Like, do you think jihad is a picnic? People die, people lose limbs, people get wounded, people get captured. Like, it's not a picnic. Come on, like, you don't look like a commander's material. Like, you look, someone who is more suited for as a librarian rather than a, someone on the front line. Do you think the jihad really needs you? And I remember that my answer changed his mind and changed my life. I told him, no, I'm not arrogant to think that the jihad needs me, but I need it. I don't want to be on the sideline, a spectator just watching what happened. Either, like, be part of history, or go home. I don't want to go home. After that, he decided to take me with him. That was I was persuasive. And 3 weeks later, we were together in Bosnia, and we had 2 people with us. For me, it was, I remember I arrived there in October of 1994. He and I left Bosnia in December of 1995, 14 months later. And I remember when I left after the war was over, and I was in a hotel in Istanbul looking at myself in the mirror. And I remember I was 17 at the time, and I felt that I have aged 14 years, not 14 months, 14 years. I just looked at my eyes and I was thinking, like, and I can never forget, like, basically how aged I felt. Because in these 14 months went from training to deployment in the front lines, to me surviving a sophisticated landmine wires that were all wired together. I don't know how I survived it. Someone was watching over me, maybe my both dead parents at the time. And the fact that during that time, I've seen everything basically that a war of that brutality, could show you. And I remember that, you go into that war because you feel that you want to do something. You don't want to be a spectator. And I remember when I arrived there, one of the things is that when I was depositing my passport and all my valuables into the safety deposit box at the Mujahideen Brigade headquarters in Zenica in Bosnia, I remember my number was 400 something. So I said, "Is that it? 400 volunteers?" Yes, 400 volunteers out of 1 billion Muslims. Only 400 people coming here to fight. Yes, and that made me sad, but also made me feel proud of it. That out of 2.5 million Muslims, I was the one out of them who answered the call, and that added to the sense of being part of a vanguard, being part of that spearhead force to bring about the revival of jihad, and jihad as not as only as an ideology but as a way of life back into Muslim psyche, Muslim collective psyche. Near the end of the war, and again October, I don't know why October was important, but October 1995, it was a ceasefire, and at that time I was we had a wedding of one of the Mujahideen there, and on the same, that kind of seated area in the grass, there were 5-6 of us, and one guy introduced himself to me, as Khalid al-Sheikh. That's how he introduced himself to me, Khalid al-Sheikh. He just came from Qatar at that time. Very well dressed. He looked like brand new to me, coming from, because for us, basically, at that time, my hair was all the way, to my shoulder, and I looked so unkempt. I'm looking at my balding head right now. I'm just lamenting the fact that once upon a time I had long hair. So anyway, he looked like really fresh, off the bus. And so I asked him, what is he doing there and everything. And then someone, nudged me and he said, do you know who this guy is? And I said, no. He said, this is the cousin of Ramzi Youssef. And I was in awe. It's like Ramzi Youssef by then became a legend because he is the one who attempted to blow up the World Trade Center, the first attack against the World Trade Center in July of 1993.
Here we go. We lost you there. So, there we go. Yeah, July of 1993.
Yeah, July 1993. This man Khalid al-Sheikh is his cousin. He is the cousin of that, legend. And I was in awe, of course. At that time, I was already developing some fascination with bombs and explosives. And because I don't know if I mentioned it, but I was mostly manning the mortars because mathematically I'm gifted, something I passed on already to my daughter. And at that time I was able to really calculate very quickly the trajectory of everything. Basically, I used to lob at our enemies. And so basically he introduced himself as Khalid al-Sheikh, and then he started telling us that the war in Bosnia is about to end. The question is, guys, where are you going to go after that?
Before you jump into this story, tell us a little bit more about Bosnia, because we've kind of glazed over it, like your combat experience, your training, what you saw, because so much of that is important to the steps that you then took. So it'd be great to hear more about what your journey as a young jihadist in, because again, that's an undertold story about foreign volunteers in Bosnia and the Balkan conflict. So it'd be great to hear more about those specific, 14 months. You said it was 18 months?
14 months, yes. I remember when I arrived at the Mujahideen headquarters in Bosnia, in Zenica, in the center of Bosnia. I mean, of course, like the first step is to go and join the training camp. The training camp is 45 days. That's it. That's all they will give you. 45 days of training. 45 days of training. Goodness, that wasn't enough, to be honest. But I remember that near the end, of the 45 days training. By the way, the training is in a mountain camp. I remember it used to be called the Sadiq camp. It's near a village called Mehric. Mehric wasn't far away for Bosnians, like who are listening, if you are there, like not far away from an ancient monastery called Gocha Gora. And so, it's a Croat Catholic monastery, but Mehric is a Muslim village at the time, and just to the mountain, overlooking it was our camp. And first you start with the AK-47s, the PKC, like the machine gun. Then you develop, you're going into the RPG-7s, and you go into sniper rifles like the Dragunov, and then, of course, you, depending on your aptitude, either you go into mountain and urban warfare. In my case, they decided that, well, you're good with math, like mortars. And so they actually extended my training for 3 extra weeks, just in order to be, with mortars, whether it is the 82 millimeter or the 120. And then I was deployed just as the snow started to fall. I was deployed, and it's the first time I experienced snow. I came from the desert, so for me it was, first of all, the novelty. The problem with the snow is that the novelty wears off very quickly. First you like it, and then as soon as you are bitten by minus 15 to minus 20 degrees temperatures, you start to think, why would I love this? And of course, it's a life of hardship. I mean, and I remember, we used to be told that we are resembling what we call warrior monks. So our days was mix of drills, training, marches, but also with it a lot of religious duties, whether it is fasting in some days, as well all the 5 prayers, and in between the 5 prayers you have the religious lessons that we attend, and so it was really almost like a monastic, military monastic order. There were no women whatsoever. So this is why, like, basically, I remember I used to, when I used to taunt ISIS, so-called jihadists, in later years, I used to say, like, you're fake jihadists, like, you have women among your ranks, you enslave women, you take them, basically, you're jihadists for sex, nothing else. So basically, we were the true ones, like, who really gave up, all sorts of pleasures. And there were no women in our ranks whatsoever. And so, and then of course there were the tense days where either we were subject to attacks, from the Serb sides, basically whether, by shellings, mortars, missiles, or basically our side shelling, sending mortars on them, or actually like, our side attacking them, or we are repelling their attacks. It was several front lines. I was deployed first to Zavidovici, and then after that I was deployed to Tuzla. And this is the first time I come across the communist Mujahideen, which was really weird. Like, it was Bosnian Muslims, but they were very, that particular brigade was very different from the brigade I used to be part of. Like, I mean, there was a Mujahideen brigade, part of the 3rd Corps, or it's called the Corpus Musulmana. However, in Tuzla, it was the 7th, and it was communist. I mean, they were still holding on to Joseph Tito's ideals. It was weird. And I never experienced that before. And then near the end of the war, I was deployed to Maglai, also not far away from Zavidovici. And that's when we started receiving the, of course, like, and it was 14 months in between, but there were, this is when, I think it was 2 months, I think it was September 12th of 1995, when it was the last major military engagement that I was involved in. And I was involved in the weirdest possible way. I was involved in as a medic. So my job is to, not to have any gun except a Makarov pistol, but to be free in order to go behind the storming troops in order to drag whoever is fallen, down the hill to the ambulances that will go towards the helicopter pads that will take them into the field hospital. And that day I will never forget it. It was a 24-hour, from 4 a.m. on the 12th of September to the 12th a.m. on the 13th of September. That's how long I was awake, and that's how long I didn't have anything to eat. And I was just living on adrenaline, dragging people out of harm's way. We were a team of 6. Only 3 of us survived that day. But we were able to save quite a few people. And some of them, later became infamous. I don't want to mention names. Some of the people I mentioned, I saved that day.
Mention names. Now's the time to mention names. This is a great story.
I remember there was a man called Azzam from Yemen who published his story, I remember, in 2006 in The Guardian. And he was talking about a young Bahraini boy who saved his life, because I came across this man who was screaming. He was just half dead in one of the trenches leading to a bunker, and I just dropped into the trench, and I'm trying to just calm him down, because sniper fire was just over my head because of his screaming. A sniper from the other bunker, it was just realizing basically there are, because he was also screaming in Arabic. I was saying, please scream in Serbo-Croat is better. And also at the same time, I was just calling on the radio, to other units, please, help, because, I'm pinned by sniper fire, and I have someone who is about to die. Why? Because his intestines were out almost. He was shot in the gut by 2 bullets from a machine gun, the PKC. So I, gave him the first morphine injection. Didn't work. He's still screaming. Second morphine injection didn't work. Third morphine injection, and I said to him, "Are you on drugs?" It's not working. He said to me, "I chew cat." So he's a Yemeni. And then I was able basically to just basically using my belt, using anything I could find on him. He had that Yemeni scarf around his neck. I tied him as much as possible. I just dragged him as much as possible all the way down. And then hours and hours later, when I finished my duty up the mountain, it was a summit called Peñalica. I never forget it. I went down, and then I went into the helicopter, and I went into the field hospital in Zavidovici. It was the underground parking of a hotel. I remember as soon as I arrived down, and I'll never forget it, I actually, it's like a ramp going down for the cars, to go into the car park. I had to really, I slipped all the way down because it's all full of blood. Like, and I slipped on the blood and I just went all the way down. I can't forget that. But nonetheless, you are on adrenaline. You just like, I don't want this to stop you. And then the scene of devastation you see there was horrendous, to the point where after an hour of helping with everyone there, you know, and the injuries were so horrific because of all the landmines and all of that were in the mountain summit. I was then grabbed by Dr. Muntasir, who is now in New Zealand, of all places. Happy life for you there, Dr. Muntasir, if you hear me. So he's from Egypt, like, and he's a surgeon, and so he, you know, gave me a pad, you know, with papers and a pen, and he said, you know, because you almost know everyone, go to the morgue, you know, and start identifying everyone and collect their wills from their pockets. Yeah, thank you. You put me in a room with at least 41 dead people. Perfect. Like, I mean, and so I was there in a room, you know, with 41 dead people, and I have to go through their pocket one by one. And then I heard, this is when I was deep into reading, you know, the will of someone, like, and I was really, you know, into it. Like, when I heard the voice of someone moaning, and I jumped, like, because of course, like, I mean, you are the only living person in a room full of dead people, and there is someone like moaning there, and so I went to the sound, and again it's the same Yemeni guy who who I saved off the mountain, and he's there. You know, they thought he's dead, but he's not, and I went out, shouted, you know, guys, he's dead, he's alive, he's not dead, come and take him. And he lived in order to again fight in Afghanistan with bin Laden, and then he lived again to fight with Zarqawi in Iraq, and then he survived and then went back to Yemen to tell the story and to talk about me, the guy who saved him twice, to a Guardian newspaper article. So so it's just one of those, you know, weird stories that I might tell my daughter one day if she can comprehend. But yeah.
So look, you were clearly a veteran at this point. You were only 17 years old. You said you'd already seen more conflict than many Western soldiers ever see in their careers. And at that point, you met the cousin of Ramzi Yusuf, who is Pakistani. I presume his cousin was also a Pakistani Al-Qaeda. Yeah. So
who would later become the mastermind of 9/11?
So yeah,
Khalid Sheikh Mohammed. Yeah.
You met that was Khalid Sheikh Mohammed. So you met Khalid Sheikh Mohammed in Bosnia.
Yes.
And that was it. You know, how do people fall into Al-Qaeda? You actually met one of the most senior members of Al-Qaeda, most infamous. So yeah, talk us through that. You met him. He was charismatic, I guess. He convinced you to continue your journey. Talk to us.
As I said, it's always about good intentions. By then, when you come into Bosnia, you're fresh, you are naive. 12 months later, like in October 1995, and I'm in front of him, and I couldn't have been more of an easier recruit for him, because, and I was still skeptical. I'm very annoyingly inquisitive person still to this day, like, you know, but even then, he said something that was really resonating with me at that time. He said, why are we fighting on the peripheries? Because he asked me a question. He said, if you are going to leave Bosnia right now, where are you going? I said, well, of course, Chechnya. Where else? I mean, basically, like, I mean, that is something that is almost similar kind of Slavic, you know, jihadist environment kind of thing. But he said, why are we running from one area on the periphery to another? Why are we going from one jihad front in faraway land to another? And I said, because that's what's happening. I mean, basically, we are answering the call, wherever that might be. You know, yesterday it was Afghanistan, and you went there yourself. Today it was here. Tomorrow it's Chechnya. The day after it could be anywhere else. And he said, you know, but what about if the center of the Muslim world was stronger? The periphery wouldn't have been easy picking for anyone who want to just have a go at Muslims. And the answer is, and what the center that might be, he said, well, of course, it is the Arabian Peninsula, it is Iraq, it is the Levant, Egypt. So he characterized Egypt, the Levant, the Arabian Peninsula, and Iraq as the center of the Muslim world that need to be cleansed of two things. American-backed Zionism, and the second thing was the American-backed leaders. So the American presence and the American influence is what keeps that region divided, constantly at war. Of course, he ignores so many, it's a superficial argument, but at that time, who am I to argue? And I remember the reply, not only from me, but from everyone who was there listening. What do you propose? He said, well, the jihadi training camps in Afghanistan are reopening again because we are preparing for a new kind of war, a war where the front line stretches from the North Pole to the South Pole, no longer restricted by where the enemy dictates where we fight, where the enemy creates conditions for sectarian and religious conflicts on the peripheries, of the Muslim world, and then your blood is shed here and there needlessly. What we need is to really overthrow the corrupt regimes of the center in order for us to create that strong center that would defend the peripheries. Sounds good. Where do I sign up? And so of course, he will give you a piece of paper and say, this is the number of Abu Zubaydah, my friend in Peshawar. So he is now, well, he's no longer in Peshawar, unfortunately. He's in Guantanamo. But anyway, I had his number in my pocket. And a few months later, I call him and I say, hey, Khalid al-Sheikh gave me your number. And he said I should call you if I ever wanted to join, the training in Afghanistan. And he said, you're more than welcome. And he gave me the exact location, the exact route and location and how to get there. And I ended up in Afghanistan in 1996, before even bin Laden arrived, 2 months before he arrived back to Afghanistan.
This is transnational jihadism as a concept being born in front of you. The world really hadn't seen this kind of terrorism before. The kind of thing where young Muslim men answer the call and go to fight in countries where Muslim populations are embattled under whatever conditions. That's something that had happened before in history. It's something that we were familiar with, but this idea of transnational jihadism, Salafi jihadism, Sunni, Islam, it's important to make that distinction, because we had what was happening in Iran had a transnational element as well, but it's a different ideology, which again, it frustrates me when they're collapsed into the same, just bracket of Islamism, because it doesn't make sense. These people hate each other and want to wipe it. They consider each other apostates. It's crazy trying to have this argument about with people who think that Hezbollah and Hamas are the same ideologically. But yeah, so that concept was a new thing. And so you met Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, 17 years old, but you didn't join immediately. You had a few months and the ideas. You were clearly an inquisitive young man, and you carried on toying with that idea of maybe we should consider moving these front lines. Maybe the Americans do need to be hit on their borders, as it were. So that talk us through the process of finally picking up the phone and deciding to go to Afghanistan.
Well, before I went to Afghanistan, I had a detour actually into Baku, into Azerbaijan, because I thought I will go and join the jihad in Chechnya. However, as soon as I arrived in Baku, I was told that the mountain passes are full of snow. However, the office that represented the jihad brigade, the Mujahideen brigade inside Chechnya, was located in Gulab Street in Baku, I remember, but it was only manned by 4 people. And I remember that one of them was a colleague of mine from the Mujahideen brigade in Bosnia. And so he said, usually we tell people don't come. But when I heard your voice on the phone, I said, no, you come. I knew I deceived you. You were supposed, you wanted to go into Chechnya, but I know you're really good mathematically, and we need you for something else completely different. And I said, what? And he said, well, we need you to cook the books for us because that is an office of a charity pretending to be a charity when in fact it was funneling millions of dollars monthly, to the Mujahideen contingent in South Chechnya, 2,000 people there in South Chechnya fighting. And this villa on Inglab Street, used to be the logistical hub, for that contingent. So I spent about 4.5 months with them, and I was doing all sorts of things, So we, the headquarters of the charity, they thought we were helping refugees when in fact we were helping the jihadists, basically killing as many Russian soldiers as they could at that time. I'm sure the pro-Ukraine people basically will, will find this rather amusing. But at that time, we were telling the headquarters of that charity in one of the most major Muslim countries. We used to tell them that we were helping the refugees, especially we used to invent calamities about floodings or rain and snow and all of these things. And I used to inflate the numbers of the refugees we were helping in order to get as much funding from them as possible. And we used to bribe so many officials. We used to have senior political figures in the Azerbaijani government, and the intelligence services used to come, and I used to prepare the brown envelopes and giving it to them in order to turn a blind eye to our operation at the time. So 4.5 months, I never thought that these 4.5 months I spent in Baku from January until May of 1996 will be so crucial in later years, for my role, because I understood immediately the importance of finance, logistics, how do you divert, funds, resources. And I remember I joked one day, I was leading the prayer, the dawn prayer. It was only 4 of us, and I was number 5, and I was leading the prayer. And after the prayers, I just said to, my fellow colleagues there in the office, I said, don't you wonder that if the Russians really, really, really wanted to win the war, against the Mujahideen, against the 2,000 Mujahideen inside there, they really shouldn't, bother with them. They should actually send a team of assassins into this villa and finish us off. I mean, I remember I used to say it in a weird way, because without us, they couldn't function. We are 5 people, but without us, they couldn't have function ever, because 3 big trucks every week used to go from our garage, full of cash, equipments, batteries, mayonnaise, basically everything, tuna cans, everything they need to survive, sugar, wheat, fuel, everything. 3 trucks every weeks used to go like clockwork. That enabled them to really put a dent on the will of the Russian Federation at the time to fight, to the point where they sued for peace at the end. And I remember when they sued for peace, and I saw Zulum Khan Yandarbayev sitting on the table in front of Boris Yeltsin. One of us said, you see, this is our doing. This is how 5 in this villa were able to help and shape events. So again, being part of history was maybe what made those lonely, boring days and nights in that villa felt as a significant achievement. And this taught me like, the lesson about logistics. So when I went to Afghanistan, it was because I felt that just being good with mortars is not good enough. I need to actually up my game. And so I wanted to train on other form of weapons, like from the T-55 tanks, the BMP, the T-62. And so I went into the military camps of Hizb Islami in Afghanistan, which was led by Gulbuddin Hekmatyar. He had the best weapon systems at the time in Afghanistan from the courtesy of the Russians. They left it there. But then the Taliban took over, and it was a long story, where the invading Taliban embraced us as their brothers in arms and all of that. And so, we started this new bromance with the Taliban. And Osama bin Laden already arrived from Sudan. And I remember when he arrived in Sudan, it was July. 2 weeks later, 14 of us from, because we learned he was only 45 minutes drive away. So we went to see him. And I know, like in many people's first impression of Osama bin Laden would be that, the very, well-dressed, white turban, very well ironed white robes. That's not how I saw him the first time. He looked so disheveled. He wasn't well dressed at all. When we arrived at their compound was lent to them by one of the Afghan warlords. His name was Yunus Khalis. And so we saw them, the Qaeda people who were fleeing from Sudan at the time. Everywhere were boxes and, containers. I mean, it's very clear that they moved in a hurry and they were completely disheveled. But I remember he received us well, and he, was talking to us about his plans and what he wants to do. And at the time, there was no Al-Qaeda in the sense. He still was in the process of establishing Al-Qaeda 2.0. Let's put it this way, like in the new version of it after the debacle of Sudan. And I remember sitting next to me was a man called Abu Abdullah al-Makki. He's from Mecca in Saudi Arabia, and he was so mesmerized by everything bin Laden was saying. Myself, few others were still skeptical, but this guy was so sold, on everything. It was 4th of August, I remember, that when he was, when we went to meet him. Then 4th of August, 2 years later, the same man who was sitting next to me, Abu Abdullah al-Makki, was the man who drove the van full of 750 kg of high explosives into the gate of the American embassy in Nairobi in Kenya. So very clearly he bought every word that bin Laden uttered at the time, but I didn't know it. It would take me a year and a detour to the Philippines, which I will skip over because it's a long story. And August of 1997, I was, by complete chance, I met Abu Hamza al-Ghamdi, who is now the leader of Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan right now. Whatever remained of it, he is now their leader. However, at the time, he was the head of Osama bin Laden's bodyguard. So all of his bodyguards, like and his security, was the responsibility of this man, Abu Hamza al-Ghamdi. He took an immediate liking to me. We spent hours together, walking in the streets of Jalalabad in Afghanistan. And this is when he convinced me finally, you have to come, you have to join. We shouldn't leave Sheikh Osama, as he used to call it. We shouldn't leave him in the mercy of the Egyptians around him. Even then, there was that kind of racism between the Saudis and the Egyptians of Al-Qaeda. And so 2 weeks later, September 1997, I went to Kandahar, and I was summoned to meet him in his study, which is just a place, full of books, like, and his mattress, like, basically. And then I met him there in the headquarters of Al-Qaeda in Tarnak, in Kandahar, near the airport. And that's when I met him the second time, and this time he was far better dressed. You can tell, like, he's well looked after now. Now they have settled. it's a far cry, from a year ago. And he remembered me from a year ago, and then he said exactly the words that I was waiting to hear. He said, well, I mean, I don't think basically we will take you to become a commando, but I think you are the right type of person that we need to send to Abu Khabbab camp. Now, Abu Khabbab camp was the elite of the elite. That is where future bomb makers go to learn, bomb making. It was a secluded camp on a mountain, in a hill slope, next to a lake, in Afghanistan, in Nangarhar, on the border with Laghman province. And the good news about it is the fact that the food there is amazing because there are only 4 learners there, 4 trainees. That's it. At any given time, there are only 4. And so I was extremely, I told him how honored and privileged I felt. And of course, he extended his hand for the bay'ah, for the allegiance, which I gave willingly. So I gave him my allegiance. And then I packed and went back to Nangarhar for the training with Abu Khabbab.
So how old were you when you joined Al-Qaeda? How old were you when you gave your bay'ah officially?
I mean, I was just 2 days shy of 19.
Wow. Okay. So that was 97, you said? 97? Yes. Okay, so fast forward. Well, don't fast forward. Tell us about those years. But obviously we're getting close to 9/11. And we're also getting close to you leaving this path and getting recruited by British intelligence. And so tell us about that journey from that point onwards. You go to bomb making school. So Osama bin Laden sent you at 19 to bomb making school. That's correct, yes?
Yes.
Okay.
Because at the end of the day, if you are good at math, hopefully you will be good at chemistry. But the whole issue is that they are good at spotting people who are predisposed to being patient while learning. And I realized that very quickly because as soon as I arrived at that camp, it's only 3 rooms. And let me put it this way. When I saw the chemicals on the shelves, you immediately realized, late in later years, that if a British health and safety inspector were to show up there, they will have a heart attack. He doesn't have to worry about us beheading him or anything. Basically, I mean, he will have a heart attack. He will die of natural causes. If seeing all the chemicals stacked together in the very weird, way we did, and in a very, it's like, do you call this a lab? But that's the idea, is to give you the most basic of environment and give you the chemicals and tell you these are the most basic of equipments. Now, create a device. And I remember that Abu Khabbab, who was the instructor, an Egyptian, he was a captain in the Egyptian army bomb disposal unit. And then he joined the Afghan jihad in 1986. So he was already a legend. And he was telling us why there is only 4 of us. He said, here, we tend to limit the number of people to 4 because the more people there are, the less concentration and the greater chance of a mistake. And here in this camp, your first mistake is your last mistake. You're not going to make another one. And I remember I heard this and I saying, okay, I have to be very careful. I have to listen to every word they say. And of course, for the next 9-10 months, it was grueling because it wasn't just only about building the devices, but also building the electric circuits. How do you link them to alarm clocks, to Casio watches, to lampposts, to all of these things? How do you create the detonator material, basically TATP or BICRIC or RDX or anything like that? And then how do you create the term fertilizer, which is ammonium nitrate, into a bomb material, whether you're using it with aluminum powder or other material that are low in oxygen. And then you go into astrolites, and then you go into other forms of explosives, such as like HP, hydrogen peroxide based explosives, nitroglycerine explosives. Like, I mean, you go on and on, PTN and TATP and all of these things, and then you go in, you keep going, and then you go into biological weapons. How do you make botulism? How do you make, like, poisons, whether it is cyanide and arsenic, and then how you make chemical weapons, whether it is hydrogen cyanide and how do you, and we used to test all of these subjects on rabbits, so we had a whole rabbit farm next to us, like, basically at any given time, like, we were experimenting on them, and so that was a bit disturbing, but nonetheless, we were told it's for the greater good. And this is when I met one of the most psychotic, people. Like, he was my, basically, like, you can call him roommate, like, basically there in that camp for the next 10 months. Mu'izz Fazzani, who is now serving a life sentence. He is you remember the Sousa Beach attack, which killed so many British tourists in Tunisia, and the Bardo Museum? He was the mastermind. So, I had the, the non-pleasure, like, basically, of being his fellow learner there at the time. And the only fun memory of him, like, I would say that he was a very good, cook when it comes to pasta. So I realized immediately that there is so much to do there, but I was thinking that, what are we going to use that for? So for me, my understanding is that these are going to be IEDs, against, forces that we encounter in wherever, like, basically we will be deployed, whether it is the tanks or the armored vehicles or the Humvees or whatever, like that. Like, that's what I was thinking. However, like, my fellow learners had something else in mind, especially when we were talking about poisons, talking about, water facilities in civilian areas, poison gas, like, use it in cinemas and use it in underground facilities, like, for the train or the subways, or what, so this is when I started to think that that's not what I signed up for. But until then, we haven't yet, as Al-Qaeda, as an organization, we have not yet announced our presence to the world, but that will change, of course, with August of 1998. So almost a year after I joined, when, of course, the attacks against the American embassies in Nairobi in Kenya and Dar es Salaam in Tanzania happened. Now, that for me was the wake-up call, because you see, until then, Al-Qaeda did not yet carry out any terrorist attack. It was its first ever terrorist attack. And for me, I thought the first thing going to happen is that we will be attacking an American Navy base in the Middle East. We are going to attack an American air base. But then it was an American embassy in the middle of a crowded African capital. That's not what I signed up for. That's not exactly, so I didn't feel good about it. And especially as the news started to come, and we were listening to the radio, we had radios, and we were listening to, to them, that 224 people were killed, 12 Americans, and the rest were all, Kenyans, Somalis, Ugandans, who had nothing whatsoever. They were in the wrong place at the wrong time.
So were you still at the school during this, during the bombings, the Nairobi bombings?
I was at that time at a different camp. I already left that school. I'm done. Like, you don't need to spend all of your life there. But by then, like, I felt a great weight of responsibility. Like, this weight of responsibility, this weight of unease, it started to weigh on my conscience, because first, why Africa? I thought, like, basically we're going to fight in the Middle East. That's the first thing. And why a civilian installation? And why there were so many, like a ratio of almost 20 to 1, civilians, unrelated civilians with, to the target, like, and the target were actually also diplomats. So I remember I went and I asked the so-called mufti of Al-Qaeda at that time, Abu Abdullah al-Muhajir. I remember I asked him the question. He's from Egypt. I said to him, look, I'm not doubting. I'm just saying that since I've been trained to one day build a device like this to kill as many people as that, you need to give me reassurance that I'm not going to end up, one day, standing before God and I see a long line of people, looking at me, basically their souls or whatever, looking at me and asking the Lord, like, basically ask him, why did he do it? So can you give me some reassurances? So he was telling me all about, oh yes, we have something called the human shield fatwa. What? Yeah, the human shield fatwa. Like, when the enemy is hiding behind civilians, we have the right to do that. We have the right to attack, even if it means that civilians will die, and God will sort them out. God will make it up to them.
It's amazing how many times I've heard that doctrine announced by various different sides, particularly in the Middle East, whether you're nationalist or secular or whatever. The human shield doctrine is something that they're, is adopted by more than just the jihadist side, so we say.
Exactly. And so I remember that when I heard what he said, and then he looked at me and he said to me, come on. I mean, they're just a bunch of Africans, like, who cares? And I was like, okay, shall I tell the Somalis that we have here in the camp what you just said? But anyway, like, I thought, okay, I'll keep it hidden in my heart. I asked him before I left, I said, where can I find that fatwa? And he said, look at the comprehensive works of Ibn Taymiyyah. And yeah, thank you, because the comprehensive works of Ibn Taymiyyah, 37 volumes, man, okay. 2 weeks later, I found myself in the Al-Qaeda's headquarters in Kabul. Now, that was like a gigantic villa, it's almost like a palace, in Wazir Akbar Khan, which is, the high-end neighborhood in Kabul. And I used to love going there because they have a huge library, and, I was an avid reader since a young age, so I loved being there. And I took the advantage of the fact that, yes, I know you gave me a needle in a haystack, but, the last 2 volumes of the 37 volumes were the indices. And so looked through them, yes, found it on volume 28, went there and started reading it. And I remember that it was a shocking read. Seriously, it was a shocking read. So the fatwa is like this. It's not Ibn Taymiyyah's fatwa. He is relating to a century and a half earlier, where in the early 1200s, when AD, where the Mongols started invading the Central Asian cities of the Khwarizmid Muslim Empire. So it was like Otrar and Nisapur and Samarkand and Bukhara. So the Muslim defenders of these cities were asking for fatwas because what they said is the fact that the Mongols, when they sack one city, they take a chunk of that city's civilian population and make them push the siege towers, the Mongol siege towers, towards the walls of the next city to be sacked. And these people were asking for fatwa. Can we kill them? Can we shoot the arrows and the javelins and spears at these at these people, like in the poor people pushing the siege towers, even though they are our fellow Muslims? And the answer was yes. They are dead anyway. I mean, so defend yourselves. They are dead.
So he was comparing civilians outside of an embassy to people pushing military siege of people forced to push. That's a really thick comparison, basically. Just, it's not even comparable, right? But it just shows just how far gone these guys were from, basic human decency, right?
Absolutely. I mean, I was like, it's like, okay, this is life and death situation, and you are telling me that. Did you see the American embassy in Nairobi pushing siege towers towards Mecca or Medina that you have to somehow blow it up, and blow up, like, I mean, first of all, 220 innocent Africans were killed that day, but also 150 were blinded for life. 5,000 were wounded because the device was so full of shrapnels. A tactic that we were taught to maximize casualties. We were always told that your entire thinking is about maximum casualties. Maximum casualties. And I thought, like, look, I don't want to be standing one day having to answer this before, the Lord. It's the equivalent of, the initiation when someone give you a gun and say, like, you want to join us, you have to, you have to shoot someone who you don't know, like, point blank without asking if the other person deserve it or not. I'm not willing to take the chance, sorry. And so I just waited for the right moment. It came 3 months later when I had a scheduled checkup in Qatar. I had to go to a hospital there because of a major trauma to my liver. A year earlier, due to typhoid and malaria hitting me at the same time. Afghanistan, dirty water, lots of mosquitoes. What do you expect? And we were training next to a lake, so of course, like, it's gonna be full of malaria. And little did I know that the French intelligence were intercepting the phone calls that I made, to Qatar for a friend to pick me up from the airport. They knew exactly who I am. Somehow, being a student of Abu Khabbab somehow take you up the notch of interesting people. So being a graduate of that camp is, wasn't exactly like, good thing to have on your CV. And so I arrived in Qatar, and yes, I had some kind of a health checkup, but then straight away into the detention of the Qatari security services. And I still remember, like, it was one of the funniest episodes, in my life. It just was funny. They brought me in, they put me on a chair, the other side of the room. The lights were on me. There was a very long table, 9 figures at least, like, sitting there. I can barely make them up. There were Qataris, there were Sudanese, there were Jordanians. At the time, the Qatari security service didn't have enough interrogators, so they used to have auxiliary interrogators from Sudan and from Jordan. And so they started asking me questions about confirming who I am. Are you such and such? Yes. And that's your name that's your birth name? Yes. You grew up in this city? Yes. And you were in Bosnia fighting the jihad there? Yes. Okay. You don't deny it? No, I don't deny it. You were in Afghanistan. You were training. You gave your allegiance to Osama bin Laden. Did you not? Yes. You don't deny it? No, I don't deny it. So you were also trained with Abu Khabbab. Is it true? Yes. And then I started to feel that their kind of combativeness started to, combative attitude started to leave. They started to dry up, and they started, like, feeling a little bit confused. Like, they said, hold on here, like, basically, you're being very, truthful and cooperative here. Is there anything that we are not getting? Well, you see, gentlemen, as soon as I boarded that flight from Peshawar to Doha here, I renounced my oath to Al-Qaeda. I renounced it. I actually, like, was leaving for good. Why? Can you tell us why? So I told them exactly what I told you. They left the room, all of them. 10 minutes later, they came back, switched on all the light. They lined up to shake my hand and give me hugs and telling me, like, basically, thank you so much, welcome back. Like, we really, like, hope what you're telling us is true. Like, and we would love to have you here with us, like, for a few days, because there are so many things we want to go over with you. And I said, yeah, be my guest. Like, they said, no, actually, you're going to be our guest. So, and for the next 9 days, I had debriefings that were, overseen by French intelligence officers because they have so many questions. It turned out like I was really joined at the hip at the time without knowing it with one of the most wanted people for the Paris metro bombings of 1995. And so I ended up giving a lot of info that led to finally having his photo for the first time. I led them to where his photograph and passport copy was. That gave them all the necessary proof that I really didn't want to be with them anymore. And that's when I was told, look, I mean, a Qatari minister came to visit me at where I was staying. And he said, look, son, you have no idea that how much we would love to keep you here. Because he asked me the question. He said, what is it that you want now? I said, I want to go to university, just go back to education, and later I want to become a history teacher and just go and become a teacher in a school, just like everyone else. 4 years later, and so he sighed because he thought I was naive. So much to the relief of my would-be students, it never happened. I was told that no, it's not going to happen like this. Unfortunately, if you stay here, you will run into many of your former friends all the time. Doha at the time was a city of 250,000 people. Every day in a mosque or a supermarket or anywhere, I could run into people I know. And so he said, you need to be adopted by a much bigger agency that can both protect you and find better use for you. And so I said, and who are we talking about? He said, well, at the moment, basically the French are very keen on you. I said, I'm not keen on them. So the Americans, nope. I just 3 months ago, I survived their cruise missile attack on my on the camp I was in. 6 people died, and so and exactly basically the place of sleeping next to mine, basically someone lost their leg there. So it was a really horrific attack that day. It's just too early for me to just switch sides here. And he said the British. Little did I know that in the 1960s and 70s, my dad did actually have extensive relationship with the British intelligence services, and I didn't know about it until years later. So I didn't know that. So maybe it wasn't the blood. I don't know. I just felt more affinity there, and I said yes. But how long do I have to decide? He said to me, half an hour. Half an hour to decide? Yes, half an hour. Okay, and how do I leave? Where do I leave? You don't have to worry. We could put you on an airplane right now, basically, and in the evening, and then you will be there by midnight. And by midnight, I was there in Heathrow, received by 2 officers, from both MI5 and MI6, and that's how it all started.
That is amazing. Honestly, as far as stories go, that's crazy. So look, you've given us a lot of your time tonight. I'd like to know just a little bit more, if you don't mind, just about, your work with MI6, the stuff that you're allowed to tell us at least. What did you start doing for them, and where did things progress? Take us to the point of you start working with MI6 to the point that you are now writing books about it and are able to talk about it. So take us through those, because again, this is a crucial time. You're joining just before 9/11, right? So you are the conduit for. You must have been the most senior member of Al-Qaeda that the British intelligence had managed to turn at that point. So, talk us through that work, that vital work you did for the national security of Britain.
Well, as soon as I arrived, the first thing I did was to warn about Abu Hamza, the Egyptian, Captain Hook, as we call him at the time, and about his attack in Yemen. So I knew about the people he sent, I knew like, basically what they were trying to do in that church in Aden and in Yemen. And of course, like, the attack was supposed to be bigger, but at least it was thwarted just in the right time. And then after that, there was, a brief, like roughly 6 months of debriefing, because first of all, I have to put up a genius cover story. I was asked why I was there, how it all happened. The Qataris helped with it. So it was really falling into right place. And everything fell into right place because when you have two intelligence agencies, the Qataris and the British, like, working together in order to make it look convincing, it was convincing. So for 6 months, I was doing debriefing. So I was being shown hundreds of pictures. I was given maps. Since I had photographic memory, I was able to pinpoint, on the maps, since I was trained on mortars and missiles and all of that, like, maps is just second nature to me, like, and so for me, I was just pinpointing exactly every camp, every safe house, every headquarter, every front line, and every weapon depot I could, remember, like, basically. So started building a matrix for them. And of course, then giving up the entirety, I had to write it all, roughly about 600 pages, the entirety of the bomb making manual, including the poisons, the chemical weapons, the biological weapons, everything. 600 pages, like, basically, like, was written. And that was crucial. So they can know the materials that will be sorted, so, whether equipments, materials, secondary materials, auxiliary materials, everything that can actually go into bomb making. So they become policed and monitored in order to thwart that. Then phone numbers. And at the time, we just started with emails. Like, it was just beginning to catch up, but phone numbers, addresses, especially in the Middle East, Pakistan, the European continent, and the UK, of people, like, basically who were involved. And then came the question, will you go back for us? And the answer was, my pleasure, because by then I was absolutely bored. You see, in later life, people used to ask me the question, like, basically, were you not afraid? Of course, like, you're afraid. Like, there is nothing about it. But it was much later in life, like, when there was that diagnostics of mild autism, which might have explained the indifference to risk, and sometimes, like, basically miscalculating risk. And so I would definitely get myself into a much riskier situations than an average person would do, because, not because basically, like, I'm so brave, but because, my mapping of risk is rather, like, basically.
I have some autistic war journalist friends who would very much empathize with that description of their behavior.
Indeed. Exactly. Risk-taking is, rather like, one of those traits of autistic people. And so, in a sense, when I went back, and during that time, I developed that secondary role I started for myself, which is, how do I get to the leadership of Al-Qaeda without also at the same time being stuck there? Because I don't want to be a bomb maker who is sent on missions. That's not going to put me in, like, from the first mission, I will refuse. So I developed, I knew exactly the corrupt leaders of Al-Qaeda, Egyptians in particular, who needed money above everything else. And also I knew about their link to commodities in northern Pakistan, especially in Azad Kashmir, in places like Gilgit-Baltistan and Chitral and Azad Kashmir. And so I knew they have access to Kashmiri honey, which was prized very much in the Gulf region. And I knew distributors in the Gulf. And that's it. That's all I needed. I went to them and I said, look, guys, I have brilliant access to start exporting. And they said, like, what is the quantity? I said, we can start with 2 or 3 metric tons a month, and we could go above that, like, and what is the markup? It's almost 1,000%. So it was a win-win deal. And these were 4 people, like, 3, well, there were 5 people actually, like, 3 Egyptians and 2 Palestinians who were part of Al-Qaeda leadership. That relationship with them and the fact that they were making money from that, making them independent financially of Al-Qaeda, which bin Laden likes very much. He wanted his lieutenants to become business people, and that we infiltrated that kind of business community in Pakistan. He loved it. That meant, thank God, I can travel back and forth without raising suspicion, because sometimes suspicion was raised that this guy is going and coming. So whenever I get, randomly picked for interrogation by Al-Qaeda security apparatus, I will say, ask this leader or this commander or this commander. I'm acting on their orders. They are the, but of course, because they're corrupt, they want me, basically to keep pumping money for them, and so that helped. But the only problem is that meant that I was part of the business, the finance, but I wasn't part of operation. We sacrificed, unfortunately, the access to operation. If I was part of operations, I might, and even that is possibility, I might have caught one of the threads of 9/11. But unfortunately, I was shut out of operations and focused only on the finance and the business networks and the recruitment. It meant that the compartments, 3 compartments were open, but 1 compartment was completely shut in my face. We accepted that this is a rather unfortunate reality, because if I said, no, I want to be operation only, I would have been operation only, but I would have been stuck inside Afghanistan, unable to send any message to anyone. Why? Because Afghanistan, for many of the young listeners, at that time there was no landlines, let alone mobile phones or any phones of any kind. Everything used to be messaging, basically by hand. So, and that is why the best we could have, we were close to 9/11 was a message I was given by the deputy of Osama bin Laden in June of 2001, just 3 months before 9/11. He summoned me to his study, and he said, I understand that you're going back to London in a week's time. I said, yes. He said, okay, I have 2 instructions for you. One instruction is that you have to tell this man, this man, this man, and this man. So 4 men. 1 was from Saudi, 1 was Palestinian, and 2 were British Pakistanis. 2 from Birmingham, and 2 were living in London. You have to tell them that August.
I'm sure he'll be back. We just lost him again momentarily. There we go. You're back. Yeah. So you have to tell them that August.
Yeah. August should not end without all of you, with your families, with us here in Afghanistan. If September begins and you haven't left the UK, stay where you are. But if you want to come, you have to come before the end of August. 31st August is the last date. I said, yes, that's absolutely fine. Anything else? He said, yes. The second instruction is, you are leaving Afghanistan, you are never to come back. I was shocked. It's what? He said, look, you are going back, you're going to UK, and you stay there until we call you. If something, he said to me, something big is about to happen. And when it happens, and you see the Americans, he exactly said this word, the Americans, invading this country, bombing this country, waging war against us, do not be tempted to come back to fight with us here. We don't want to lose you or anyone else like you. Stay where you are. You will receive the call when we need you. When we need you, you will receive the call. And the first rule is never ask a question. I can't ask him, oh, thank you, and what is that going to be? Where is it? What is the date? No, forget it. It's not going to happen. And I can't even utter a word to anyone else. So I just went back to London. I remember I arrived at Heathrow, and I met my handlers there. In the Holiday Inn next door, we were chatting, and I told them exactly this. These are the 4 men I have to warn. They have to leave the UK. And then I told them about something big or whatever. And when they were looking at each other, the looks told me everything, that I'm not the first one to tell them of something impending. And they asked me, anything else out of the ordinary? I said, yes, they are moving a lot of the ammunitions around. And they told us it's just normal redeployment for the campaign against the Shuraya Nazar, which is the Ahmad Shah Mas'ud forces, the Northern Alliance. But I said, like, I've been in campaigns before against the Shuraya Nazar in northern Afghanistan. Jabal al-Siraj, I was part of that battle and everything, and I didn't see that much redeployment of assets. So they took the liberty to tell me that you are not the first one who tell us about something like that, and alarm bells are all over the capitals, like, basically that something big is about to happen. Any indication that anywhere, because everyone thought it will be embassies or naval bases or another USS Cole. No one thought it's going to be at the heart of America in DC and New York. And so, yeah. And I told them, now I'm stuck. I've been told to wait. They said, well, we play the game, we wait. 9/11 happened. I had a debriefing that morning, and I was actually heading back to the city I was living, temporarily in the UK. So my phone rang, and they said, "Are you seeing this?" I said, "Yes," and I'm in front of a Dixon's. At the time, it used to be Curry's. It used to be called Dixon's at the time, in Oxford Street. I saw everything, and I said, "This is it. This is the one. There is no question in my mind. Like, basically, that's the one." They said, "Go to the Washington Hotel, book a room there in Mayfair. It's going to be a long week." So, and I remember for the next 3 weeks, I was in and out of the MOD in the UK, the Ministry of Defense, just pinpointing again, locations, people, and of course, looking into, identifying, the 19 hijackers. I only recognize 4 of them, which shows how Al-Qaeda was able to compartmentalize the whole thing. Then years later, I learned that out of the 20 members of the command of Al-Qaeda, the Shura Council, only 8 knew. The 12 were in the dark. So even if I was a member of the command, most likely I wouldn't even have been aware of it. It was so compartmentalized. And but nonetheless, in February of 2002, 5 months after 9/11, I received that call. That call that Abu Hafs al-Masri, Bin Laden's deputy, even though he died in December, but still, I received that call. You are needed. Where? Saudi Arabia. Where am I supposed to land? Bahrain. What is my role? You will know what your role is. And for the next 2.5 years, that was my place. And I was, part of, Al-Qaeda in Arabia. But what they didn't know is that their first leader and several of their plots were, exposed by myself. They didn't know it. And so that was my area of operations until the end of 2004.
That is an incredible amount of history that you've given us, and it's fantastic. So look, again, you've answered basically every question that I had. You have a podcast, the Conflicted podcast, and you wrote about all of your experiences in a book. It's called 9 Lives, right? Tell us a bit about your book, the writing experience of it, and I'll put a link in the show notes, so you guys will definitely be able to buy it and read it for yourself. But yeah,
that I never intended to come out. I intended to take all of this with me to the grave because I wanted to have a normal life as much as possible, in all seriousness. After my cover was undermined by the CIA leak in the US in June of 2006, that was enough to identify me within Al-Qaeda as the spy within. So they issued their fatwa, and they held at least they held a tribunal for me. So I feel like that the due process was followed. So and I was sentenced to death. And it was Adam Gadden of all people, basically, and Abu Yahya Levy, the Mufti of Al-Qaeda, who issued the sentence. Well, proud to wear that as a badge of honor. But anyway, MI6 at the time were wondering what to do with me, and one of their senior leaders was actually leaving MI6 to go and join HSBC Bank. And so he, as the head of security and fraud and counterterrorism finance, so he said, I'm going to take him with me and look after him. And so age 28, I already retired, from the Her Majesty's Secret Service, and I went into banking, exchanging one form of terrorism to another. Weapons of mass destruction. I enjoyed it. For the next 9 years, I was a banker. I founded a financial intelligence unit for the Middle East for that bank. Teaching people basically about the financing of terrorism, and leading hundreds of investigations into dodgy charities and high net worth individuals, and IRGC and Hezbollah and Al-Qaeda, ISIS, all of that. I was enjoying it so much, and and only very few people in the bank knew about my identity, including the chairman and the CEO at that time and the head of risk. But then, and I had no intention whatsoever of coming out. I already got married. I just only confessed to my wife just before that, hey, this is me, this is my history, and I assured her, none of this will, be a public knowledge. Basically, we will live just quietly, and everything will be fine. God bless him, General Julian Thompson. He is the hero of the Falklands. He was the leader of the paratroopers that landed in the Falklands, 1980. A celebrated war hero. General Julian knew about me, and so he invited me to the Royal Air Force Club to give a talk in December of 2014. And it was supposed to be a very kind of cozy, limited people, vetted, lords, MPs, few people from academia, but no one, from the press. We didn't know there were people from the press, unfortunately, there. General Julian was extremely generous in his remarks in introducing me and the service I did. And unfortunately, that did lead to a leak in the press. So the question is, get ahead of it. So I had to agree to an interview with the BBC, because it was Peter Marshall who was there in the audience. So I had to agree to it, because others were going to go ahead of it. So I'd rather tell my side of the story rather than them making their own assumptions. And at the time, I was working for an international bank with certain reputation, so I couldn't basically escape it. So, and when I did that interview, Paul Cruikshank, a CNN journalist and a friend of mine, a CNN journalist who would become then a friend of mine and a friend for life, and a current business partner right now, partners in crime. He, got hold of my email from the BBC somehow, and he said, I would love to work with you to write a book on your life. I went to him to say no. I didn't have any intention of my life becoming a public story. But now the cat is out of the bag. So he managed to convince me. So the book was written over a 3 years period. It was published in 2018. Paul and I went ahead and then established a company together in 2020 during COVID. Now we are all based out of the UAE, servicing more than 44 major clients across the world, in the field of illicit trade, terrorism finance, geopolitical risk, and especially on terrorism finance and avoiding the pitfalls of all of these things. And that's how it happened. That's my life in a nutshell.
That is absolutely fantastic. So we got a few audience questions. Thankfully, they're mercifully short. The first one is:
Okay.
Do you get a certificate when you graduate from Al-Qaeda bomb making school?
No.
No.
No one is gonna have that piece of evidence on you. Like,
No, I mean we didn't think so, but maybe they give you like a treat, like a box of chocolates, or
the certificate is that you still have your limbs. You know,
you didn't make the one mistake. All right.
Exactly.
The next question, I believe, is you haven't got a movie about this, but is there a movie or a television adaptation of your life in the works?
Someone already bought the rights, so I don't want to announce it yet, like basically, but hopefully by the end of the year you will hear the announcement.
That's fantastic, and I guess the other one was about you revealing your identity, but you've already just answered that question now. So I think that's basically everything. We got one more comment from Subtle Knife 00 who says, "I think students would have loved a teacher telling stories with so much enthusiasm." So your alternative career path that you didn't take. You're getting an endorsement from the audience for that. So.
Thank you.
Well, look,
my pleasure.
I will put a link to your book in the show notes and your podcast, so people can go and listen to more of your thing. Oh, I did forget there was one more question. It was from I can't remember who it was, but the question was a dad joke. Are you going to give a dad joke for the day? They want a dad joke, so that's the last question for the day.
I think the fact that I survived it. Well, only for those who understand Arabic, like basically, whenever people tell me, "Were you part of Al-Qaeda?" I said no, I was part of Al-Qaima. Which because Al-Qaeda means the base, but also it means someone who is sitting. And so when some people say Al-Qaeda, it means someone who's standing.
Yeah.
So are you part of Al-Qaeda, the sitting committee? No, I'm part of the standing committee. So so that is an Arabic dad joke and Al-Qaeda dad joke.
Fantastic. I think no one can ask for, you've given us everything tonight. So look, everyone, that was Aimen Dean. Thank you so much for joining us on the show. And we hope to have you again to tell us more someday. So thank you so much. And we'll speak to you soon. Good night.
You're more than welcome. Thank you. Good night.